Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, October 12, 2023. House Republicans meet privately to discuss a way forward to elect the new speaker, but some members of Congress emerged from the meeting telling reporters the path is not clear and they are still divided over who should wield the gavel. Congressman Steve Scalise, who has been nominated for Speaker by a majority of House Republicans, needs the votes of virtually all of them to be elected in a full House vote. And about 24, by some counts, say they won't vote for him. Coming up, we hear from Congressman Scalise and other House Republicans and talk with Axios political reporter Steph Kight. Also today, a U.S. House Subcommittee hearing on violent crime in Washington, D.C. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in Israel meeting with the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, pledging the U.S. has Israel's back in its war with Hamas and describing Hamas's brutal attacks on Israeli civilians last weekend as being like ISIS. And the White House announces new plans today to help Americans in Israel evacuate if they want to, as transportation becomes more difficult with the war in day 6. We begin with the House Speaker election. This from the Washington Post. Speaker-designate and Majority Leader Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, convened a conference meeting Thursday afternoon in the hopes that he could convince members to support him on the House floor. After 2 hours behind closed doors, members are coming out and admitting their conference remains so fractured that no one, including Congressman Scalise, can come close to garnering the necessary 217 Republican votes to win the Speaker's gavel. Divisions remain so stark across several issues, from policy to how the House should be reformed. The Republicans did not get any closer to coalescing around Steve Scalise, his challenger Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, or any other colleague. The House continues to be without a speaker and is unable to do any business until one is elected. That reporting from the Washington Post. Congressman Scalise spoke to reporters after the meeting broke up.
We had a very constructive 2.5-hour-long meeting. I had asked our conference chair, Lee Stefanik, that we get everybody in a room together, not individual meetings. I'm not cutting any deals. I want to meet in front of all of our members, answer every question, and just continue to work through to unite and bring our conference together and address issues as they come up. And obviously issues have come up over the last week about the whole process of how we get our conference back on track, but then individually people have had questions, and I felt it would be much better if we did it in full view, where it's not individually, where people don't think that there are side deals going on, where everybody can see, as Republicans talking amongst ourselves, what those issues are. The good news is our support continues to grow. We're continuing to work to narrow the gap, and that's going on, and we're going to continue the meetings. There's some other members that want to meet as a group individually. If you look at the model where we've gotten big things done as a conference, and I know it's easy to forget in times like this that this majority has produced some very big policy wins for those hardworking families on energy policy, border security, trying to confront all of the spending and other problems in Washington that are creating inflation, driving up costs for families. We've done it by getting a lot of different groups within our conference together. And so I've asked that we convene those groups, as well as members who expressed individual concerns on the floor, so that we can deal with those before we go to the floor. So we're going to be talking some more as a smaller group, but a cross-section representing every swath of our conference. We have people obviously of different backgrounds that have different passions. We, for 2.5 hours, talked through those. And I took every question that everybody brought, and we're going to continue to go through this process as we grow our support, work towards getting this resolved and getting the House back open. I've got to get back to work.
Were you surprised at some of the blowback here? Did that surprise you?
Congressman Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, the current majority leader, and trying to get the support of 217 House Republicans to be elected Speaker, meeting with reporters after the closed House GOP caucus meeting. Throughout the afternoon, while the meeting was taking place, some members stepped outside and told reporters about how it was going inside. We begin with Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who supports Steve Scalise for Speaker.
What was the message inside there, Mr. Scalise?
I think it was to air grievances and have everybody talk, and we've been doing that for a while. I was the first one to speak. I just made the conference aware that we're living in a dangerous world. The world's on fire. Our adversaries are watching what we do, and that, quite frankly, they like it. And Chairman Xi talks about how democracy doesn't work, and we're proving him right. And we need to fill the chair with the speaker. Every day that goes by, it gets more dangerous. You know, I was on the phone with our friends from Israel. They're going to need a supplemental, an aid to replenish the Iron Dome. But they can't do that if we don't have a speaker in the chair. So I see a lot of threats out there, but one of the biggest threats I see is in that room, because we can't unify as a conference and put a speaker in the chair to govern. I can't get my resolution of 416 co-sponsors condemning Hamas and supporting Israel without a speaker in the chair. I can't get that supplemental aid to Israel without, a speaker in the chair. So it's very dangerous what we're doing. And I just wanted them to know that, we're playing with fire.
Can you give us a sense of what the tangible conversation points are in that room? Not just grievances, but like, should Scalise drop out? Is Jim Jordan still in contention? Just some of the actual meat.
There's talking about, they're airing these grievances, but at the end of the day, we elected the speaker designee. And, we may just have to bring it to the floor and have another episode like we have with McCarthy. I don't really know if he's going to get the requisite votes right now.
So what are the odds that happens today?
I think they'll be in that room for quite some time.
Congressman Michael McCall, Republican from Texas, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, with reporters outside the closed House Republican members' meeting. Congressman Troy Nehls, Republican from Texas, also speaking with reporters. He says he will vote for Jim Jordan for Speaker.
Nothing. A lot of people got up. See, what you do is you have a microphone, and you give everybody an opportunity to air their grievances. And you get 2 minutes to do it. Several members went up there and expressed their concerns, support for Steve or support for Jim. But in the end, I don't know what we accomplished, other than we know we have a lot of division within the conference.
Can Steve get to 217?
Not with what I heard.
Was there discussion in there of empowering the Speaker pro tem?
Didn't hear it. No, there was none of that.
Did Mr. Scalise give any indication of whether lawmakers are expected to stay in over the weekend to continue?
We don't know. I'm walking out of there. I don't know. I don't think we should leave Washington until we can come together and anoint someone.
Did you raise the possibility of making Trump the next
I didn't
speaker?
say anything in there. I didn't say anything. My point is this, as I've always said, I don't know anybody can get to 217 in this conference. Hopefully we can. I hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong. I do. I want to be wrong. But if we're here till Sunday, Monday, Tuesday next week, we don't have something. We got to come up with another option here. We got to think maybe it's somebody from the outside. Why not the leader of our party? Bring in the leader of our party.
What do you think about empowering McHenry?
Well, he is, but he's already won the primary. Forget that.
What do you think about empowering the interim speaker?
I never had a discussion about that.
But you personally, what do you think?
I don't really know. I can't comment on that.
Can you just shed some light on how Scalise is addressing his critics in there?
He's answering questions. Steve Scalise is a very effective leader. I think he's great, but there are obviously a handful or two, or maybe 2 handfuls, that do not want him to be our speaker. That's it.
How many is 2 handfuls?
Well, it's I'd say 10 to 20.
Congressman Troy Nehls, Republican from Texas, with reporters. Other Republican House members telling how things are going inside the meeting room. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia.
How are things going in there?
I think everything's at a gridlock. It's a waste of time continuing to go in there behind closed doors. We are elected by the people. We represent the people. We need to be on the House floor, and we can fight this out on the House floor. I think we need to start voting.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia. Here is Zach Nunn, Republican from Iowa.
We spend more time getting together and actually electing a speaker. And at this point, I care less who that person is and more that they're willing to get policy to the floor. We've got a pathway to do that right now. There's a lot of very good people in that room right now, but there's a lot of people, and I'm only on this job for 10 months. There's a lot of people with a lot of baggage. They need to move beyond what's in their personal interest and start putting their 750,000 bosses' interests before their own.
For the latest on the race for House Speaker, we're joined on the phone by Steph Kight, political reporter with Axios. Thanks for being with us again. Congressman Steve Scalise still looking for the 217 Republican votes he needs to be elected. What's the state of the race?
Yeah, so Scalise is still a far way from having the votes that he needs to actually become Speaker of the House. Of course, this is a very familiar problem for anyone who watched McCarthy struggle to get the votes earlier this year, going through 15 rounds of votes. And it's just become painfully clear just how divided House Republicans continue to be. And it still remains to be seen whether Scalise, although, narrowly winning the nomination from Republicans, will actually be able to get to that 217 votes needed. There have been dozens of members who have said that they will not be voting for him, would vote for Jordan. There have been some members, like Congresswoman Luna, who have gone back and forth on whether they would vote for Scalise or not. So things continue to be up in the air. And of course, Scalise and his team continue to whip the votes, reaching out to the holdouts, trying to get the numbers they need.
The last time this happened wasn't too long ago with the election of Speaker McCarthy. It was out in the open. We saw it on the House floor. They're meeting in closed session. How does that change things?
Well, certainly Republicans want to avoid what we saw in January, and I think that's why we're seeing so many of these meetings behind closed doors. They're trying not to make a spectacle of this, of course, concerned that this would hurt them politically going into 2024, but it's still tough for them to hide this completely when we're going days with no Speaker of the House at this point. But this does change the dynamic some. Of course, people are able to express their concerns quietly. They're not being held to account publicly, casting their votes, in front of everyone. It does give Scalise more time to kind of massage things, try to get consensus before they go to the floor. But we've also seen many members being pretty vocal anyways about their objections to Scalise and the reasons why they're not voting for him, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene continuing to say that it's because of Scalise's blood cancer and having to go through chemotherapy, that she doesn't want him to have to be, running the House as well, and others who have their own reasons for not backing the majority leader.
Are we learning anything about how these closed meetings are going, what the tone is like, what they're discussing?
I mean, consistently what we're hearing as the conference comes together and then releases, and as, myself and my colleagues are hearing from members coming out of those, is that very little progress is being made in many cases. It still seems that despite the many hours that they've spent trying to find a solution, they leave these meetings not with any progress, but with plans to schedule another meeting with the Republican caucus. And really, time is running out. There's only so long that Scalise can try to whip these votes before people are going to have to come up with an alternative. And, we're already hearing from people who are kind of discussing who some of the backup people might be, whether it's Tom Cole, or others who maybe are more moderate and well-liked and, less of the firebrands like Jim Jordan and maybe not as high profile as Steve Scalise. We're not quite at that point yet, but that time could come sooner rather than later if we don't see some significant progress on Scalise's behalf.
I guess every time we talk about this, we have to talk about what the House is not able to do and what the deadlines are without a speaker.
I mean, yeah, we are now coming close again to, it's only a couple of weeks away where they will have to, again, come up with some kind of solution to keep the government funded. Of course, they passed the stopgap measure, which led to the situation we're in right now with McCarthy ousted from the speakership. But they will, again, have to find a way to fund the government, either through appropriation bills like they were hoping to be able to get done, or through another short-term measure. And of course, everything happening in Israel right now is only raising the stakes even higher with, House members, senators, and even the White House being concerned that what's going on in the House could hurt the U.S.'s ability to really provide the aid that Israel needs. And that's a concern that we are continuing to hear from people all across the government.
Steph Kight is a political reporter with Axios. Her stories are at Axios.com and on X, formerly Twitter, at Steph W. Kight. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, who was voted out of office last week by the full House, spoke to reporters today before the closed meeting of House Republicans about the challenges facing Congressman Steve Scalise to become the next Speaker.
Advice to Scalise on trying to unify the party?
It's not an easy task. You got to listen to people. You got to go through, but time is of the essence. There's not that much time left from the standpoint. So.
Do you think it's possible that he can get the votes?
Possible. It's a big hill, though. He told a lot of people he's going to be at 150, and he wasn't there. So.
Would you prefer to see Jordan at this point?
No, I mean, conference makes that decision.
Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy with reporters this morning in the U.S. Capitol building. ABC News reports that the latest GOP holdouts come from across the party spectrum, from deep red rural districts to more moderate suburban regions, and had a range of explanations for why they wouldn't back Steve Scalise. While Steve Scalise has won over some of Kevin McCarthy's critics, such as Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida and Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, he may have alienated some of former Speaker McCarthy's loyal allies, such as Carlos Jimenez of Florida and Lloyd Smucker of Pennsylvania. Kevin McCarthy was Speaker from January 7th of this year until October 3rd of this year. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, led the House Democrats for 20 years, 2003 until the beginning of 2023, and was twice elected House Speaker, serving 2007 through 11 and 2019 through 2023. Nancy Pelosi discussed the difficulty House Republicans are having in finding a Speaker candidate that can get the 217 votes to be elected in a virtual conversation Wednesday night with LA Times reporter Pat Morrison.
Today we saw that Representative Steve Scalise was the name that was voted out from the Republicans. Whether it'll reach the floor, what will happen, there's no guarantee that he becomes Speaker. What effect does this internal fracas on the part of the Republicans have as far as how the Speaker can be elected, how easily a Speaker can be deposed? Does this detract from the power of the Speaker, the authority of the Speaker's position?
I think that it detracts from the dignity of the institution. And we always said we want to protect the institution. We have a responsibility to it. It is in our Constitution as the legislative branch, the first branch of government, but the House elected every 2 years, closest to the people, called the People's House. And by custom, the majority party, and wish that we were, but not talking politics here, the majority party then nominates a Speaker from its own ranks, and that by custom, that person would get the majority of the votes on the floor. Unfortunately, what happened at the beginning of this year was incredible shrinking of the speakership by giving away authorities and the rest to get votes. And therefore, we're in this situation where only one person can move to vacate the chair. And that's what you saw happen last week with, there turned out to be 8, but 1 to make the motion. That shouldn't be the way it is. You should be able to vacate the chair if there's a reason, but it shouldn't be just one person having a whim rather than a real purpose and reason. So anyway, just to the point, the House cannot function. The only thing the acting Speaker, McHenry, can do is call for the election of a Speaker. That's all. And so until that happens, we can't put legislation on the floor. We can't do anything else.
You said rather proudly that you were elected Speaker with no Republican votes. You had enough Democrats.
No, I wouldn't even want any. I mean, that is to say, you want to be able to be elected by your own caucus. And I can understand why they would not want any Democratic votes. I certainly didn't want any Republican votes, especially they were, shall we say, Trumpian.
Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, former House Speaker, interviewed Wednesday night in a virtual event hosted by the group Jews United for Democracy and Justice. CNN with an article that has this: the deadlock is leading to intensifying frustration as the House GOP looks no closer to coalescing around a Speaker candidate. Several Republicans described Thursday's meeting as a venting session. that wasn't terribly productive. Many said it didn't feel like anyone could actually get to the 217 votes needed. Nicole Maliotakis, a New York Republican, saying this is petty and I'm getting freaking tired of it. We're all in there sharing our feelings, but the reality is we still need to get to 217. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked today what role, if any, the president could play.
Now in the second week without the House having an elected speaker, does that change at all any conversations the president may be having with senior House leaders, Republicans, Democrats, about speeding this process along?
Which process?
Of electing a speaker.
I mean, look, it's their process to run. They are, this is the House Republicans, as I've said over and over again. It is their process. The president doesn't have a vote. It is what we're seeing is certainly shambolic chaos that we're seeing over there on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue, and they need to get their act together. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on behalf of the American people. We've said this over and over again. They need to figure this out. How are they going to select their speaker? That's up to them. But of course, the president wants to continue to move forward on making sure that the business of the American people is done. But it doesn't stop the president for continuing to do the work. We announced junk fees the other day. The president has been being pretty engaged and active every day on behalf of the American people, and that's something that he's going to do. But of course, we want to see the House Republicans get their act in order.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, during her briefing, stayed with the C-SPAN networks as the race for House Speaker continues. Although the House cannot conduct legislative business on the floor without a permanent speaker, the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime held a hearing today titled Victims of Violent Crime in the District of Columbia. The witnesses included crime victims, a police detective, and Washington, D.C.'s Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice. The subcommittee chair is Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Kentucky.
The crime we are witnessing just a few blocks from this building is unprecedented. No section of the city can be considered safe anymore, and the man who is in charge of prosecuting the criminals has abandoned his responsibilities, and that's Matthew Graves, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, who was appointed by President Joe Biden. He is failing to prosecute criminals. His office has consistently declined to prosecute criminals in the district. In 2021, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia opted against prosecuting 67% of arrests presented in the D.C. Superior Court. To provide context, out of the 15,315 arrests made in D.C., 10,261 did not lead to prosecution. In comparison, in 2015, USAODC only declined to prosecute 35% of cases, which suggests that the office under Graves' leadership is failing to prosecute crimes and protect the public. In just a few short years, the city went from having 65% of cases prosecuted to having 65% of cases dropped, a complete reversal that has had a catastrophic impact on public safety. Mr. Graves has indicated that the type of cases he is refusing to prosecute are primarily illegal gun possession and illegal drug possession cases. Without fail, we can anticipate that my Democrat colleagues will call for more gun control, but President Biden's hand-picked prosecutor for Washington, D.C. refuses to enforce gun laws already on the books. Violent crime rates in Washington, D.C. have seen a significant spike this year. Just last week, the district surpassed 200 homicides, the quickest the district has hit this mark at this point in the year this century. As of October 3rd, 2023, violent crime is up 38% from the same time last year.
Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Crime Subcommittee at the start of today's hearing. Also making an opening statement, the ranking Democrat of the full Judiciary Committee, Gerald Nadler from New York.
No one should be afraid in their own community. No one should be afraid to walk to school, to go to their neighborhood park, or to drive home to their families after a long day at work. We all share a commitment to protecting our communities, and I want to thank our impacted witnesses for appearing today and for sharing their stories. The COVID-19 pandemic destabilized many communities nationwide, exacerbating root causes of violent crime like poverty and joblessness. And it left many of our young people without the daily structure and mentors to help them succeed. While some cities have largely recovered from the effects of the pandemic, Washington, D.C. still has more work to do to improve public safety. But make no mistake, our Republican colleagues have not called this hearing to help D.C. solve problems. They were not looking to solve problems when they called a hearing on victims of violent crime in Manhattan just 2 weeks after its district attorney charged President Trump with multiple felonies. They were not looking to solve problems when they held a roundtable in Chicago mere days before a potential government shutdown. And so too today, as Republicans struggle to elect a new speaker, sending the House spiraling into new depths of chaos and dysfunction, this hearing is yet another attempt to distract and mislead the American people. We won't fall for it. The Republican majority offers no policy solutions that would actually protect residents of Washington, D.C., or other big cities. Instead, they seek only to flood these cities with more guns, while they work against meaningful legislation to invest in our communities and support proven public safety measures.
Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York, the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee at today's Crime Subcommittee hearing. On Wall Street, the Dow down 173, NASDAQ down 85, S&P down 27. Story from CNBC, inflation was unchanged in September, but price pressures seem poised to continue their broad and gradual easing in coming months, according to economists. In September, the Consumer Price Index increased 3.7% from 12 months earlier, the same rate as in August, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics said Thursday. The latest reading is a significant improvement on the COVID pandemic-era peak of 9.1% in June 2022, the highest rate since 1981. And the Social Security Administration says that Social Security benefits will increase in 2024 by 3.2%. That cost of living adjustment, or COLA, will be an average of $50 per month for the more than 71 million beneficiaries. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source. On C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines. Federal prosecutors have filed new charges against Senator Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey, and his wife, accusing them of conspiring to have the senator act as a foreign agent of Egypt. The two were indicted in September on charges that they took hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes in exchange for using the senator's power and influence on behalf of the government of Egypt and New Jersey businessmen. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, has now called on the full Senate to vote on a resolution to expel Senator Menendez, putting out a statement saying Senator Menendez should not be a U.S. Senator. He should have been gone long ago. It is time for every one of my colleagues in the Senate to join me in expelling Senator Menendez. We cannot have an alleged foreign agent in the United States Senate. This is not a close call. Expulsion requires a 2/3 majority vote of the Senate. And today is the 25th anniversary of the death of Matthew Shepard, an openly gay 21-year-old student at the University of Wyoming who was beaten by two young men and abandoned tied to a fence near Laramie. President Biden, with a written statement, today as threats and violence targeting the LGBTQI+ community continue to rise, our work is far from finished. No American should face hate or violence for who they are or who they love. I once again call on Congress to send the Equality Act to my desk so we can ensure LGBTQI+ Americans have full civil rights protections under our laws, because every American is worthy of dignity, acceptance, and respect. That statement from President Biden. Associated Press reports from Tel Aviv that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken vowed American support to Israel on Thursday as its military pulverized the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip with airstrikes and prepared for a possible ground invasion. As Palestinians tried to stock up on bread and groceries amid dwindling supplies, Israel said nothing would be allowed into Gaza until around 150 hostages taken captive by Hamas during a weekend attack are freed. International aid groups, goes on the Associated Press, warned of a worsening humanitarian crisis after Israel halted deliveries of food, water, fuel, and electricity to Gaza's 2.3 million people and prevented entry of supplies from Egypt. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Tel Aviv, condemning what he called Hamas's litany of brutality and inhumanity and the attacks as the worst of ISIS, and pledging U.S. support for Israel, saying we will always be there by your side. We'll hear from the Secretary in a moment, but first, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu welcoming his guest and the commitment of the U.S.
Your visit is another tangible example of America's unequivocal support for Israel. Hamas has shown itself to be an enemy of civilization. The massacring of young people in an outdoor music festival, the butchering of entire families, the murder of parents in front of their children and the murder of children in front of their parents, the burning of people alive, the beheadings, the kidnappings of a young boy, not only kidnapped, molested, hurt, attacked, and the sickening display of celebrating these horrors, the celebration and glorification of evil. President Biden was absolutely correct in calling this sheer evil. Hamas is ISIS, and just as ISIS was crushed, so too will Hamas be crushed. And Hamas should be treated exactly the way ISIS was treated. They should be spit out from the community of nations. No leader should meet them. No country should harbor them. And those that do should be sanctioned. Tony, my friend, I say to you, I say to all of us, there will be many difficult days ahead. But I have no doubt that the forces of civilization will win. And the reason that's true is because we understand what is the first prerequisite of victory. It's what you just said in our meeting. Moral clarity. This is a time, a particular time, a special time, that we must stand tall, proud, and united against evil.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu standing beside U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in Tel Aviv. The Prime Minister today also posting photos of some of the victims of Hamas's attack, including babies riddled with bullets or charred and blackened from being burned. Secretary Blinken began his remarks with a personal reflection.
I come before you not only as the United States Secretary of State, but also as a Jew. My grandfather, Maurice Blinken, fled pogroms in Russia. My stepfather, Samuel Pizar, survived concentration camps, Auschwitz, Dachau, Majdanek. So, Prime Minister, I understand on a personal level the harrowing echoes that Hamas's massacres carry for Israeli Jews, indeed, for Jews everywhere. I also come before you as a husband and father of young children. It's impossible for me to look at the photos of families killed, such as the mother, father, and 3 small children murdered as they sheltered in their home in Kibbutz near Oz, and not think of my own children. This was just one of Hamas's countless acts of terror. In a litany of brutality and inhumanity that, yes, brings to mind the worst of ISIS. Babies slaughtered, bodies desecrated, young people burned alive, women raped, parents executed in front of their children, children in front of their parents.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken today, during a joint statement with the Israeli Prime Minister in Tel Aviv. The Secretary went on to reaffirm U.S. support for Israel as it fights Hamas.
The message that I bring to Israel is this: you may be strong enough on your own to defend yourself, But as long as America exists, you will never, ever have to. We will always be there by your side. That's the message that President Biden delivered to the Prime Minister from the moment this crisis began. It's the message that I and my other colleagues in the government have delivered to our Israeli counterparts on a daily, even an hourly basis. It's the message that I bring with me to our discussions today, and it's what I'll affirm when I meet with the members of Israel's newly formed national emergency government. We welcome the government's creation and the unity and resolve that it reflects across Israel's society. We're delivering on our word, supplying ammunition, interceptors, to replenish Israel's Iron Dome, alongside other defense materiel. First shipments of U.S. military support have already arrived in Israel, and more is on the way. As Israel's defense needs evolve, we will work with Congress to make sure that they're met. And I can tell you, there is overwhelming bipartisan support in our Congress for Israel's security. Here in Israel and everywhere, we will reaffirm the crystal clear warning that President Biden issued yesterday to any adversary, state or non-state, thinking of taking advantage of the current crisis to attack Israel. Don't. The United States has Israel's back.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in Tel Aviv, standing beside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He later visited an aid station that is helping survivors of the Hamas attacks on Israel, hearing emotional stories and receiving a warm welcome. Secretary of State Blinken will be meeting with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas on Friday. A story from thehill.com, Congressman Corey Mills, Republican from Florida, said he is in Israel doing Biden's job as he helps Americans escape the country that has been deluged by fighting in recent days. He said he and his team are conducting ground evacuations to help Americans in getting back to the United States, adding that many Americans have not heard back from the State Department about getting out of Israel. Congressman Corey Mills was interviewed Monday night on Fox News.
Bottom line is that we were getting a ton of requests from Americans who were stranded, who had tried to reach out to the State Department, were getting nowhere, had flights canceled, no more hotel room availabilities, and were really kind of off on their own. And I just kind of made the decision, that I needed to step up and do something. We talk about the difference between statesmen and politicians. One acts and one talks. Unfortunately, this isn't my first time doing this because my team and I actually had conducted the very first successful overland rescue out of Afghanistan in the 2021 botched withdrawal that rescued a mother and 3 children from Amarillo, Texas. So right now, our big tactic is to try and look at consolidation points. My team and I run the routes prematurely so we can try and just make sure we can run it to see if there's any safety issues and look at the best evac areas, but doing predominantly just ground evacs and looking to try and get into bordering countries like Jordan to ensure that we can get them back to America.
Congressman Corey Mills, Republican from Florida, interviewed on Fox News Wednesday night. Today at the White House, John Kirby, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, gave an update on the number of Americans killed and unaccounted for during the fighting in Israel, and also announced new efforts to evacuate Americans who want to leave.
I'll start with the saddest of news. We can now update the number of Americans that we know have been killed to 27, and the number of unaccounted for stands today at 14. We're obviously doing everything we can to support and inform the families. Now, sadly, 5 more families have now gotten the worst possible news that any family can conceive of getting. And we're going to stay in touch with them as appropriate. Same goes for those family members of those who are unaccounted for. And by unaccounted for, we mean that. We don't know where they are. They don't know where they are. So we're going to obviously stay in touch with them as well. And certainly we're continuing to work with Israeli officials to make sure that we're getting as much context and information as possible that we will share with them. Also, as you, I think, realize, we are all acutely aware of limited availability right now on commercial flights out of Israel and the demand signal by U.S. citizens who may want to depart. The President has asked his team to ensure that we are assisting U.S. citizens who do want to leave Israel and providing them with a safe means of doing that. So beginning tomorrow, the United States government will arrange charter flights to provide transportation from Israel to sites in Europe. They're still working through some of the details of that to assist U.S. citizens and their immediate family members who have, for whatever reason, not been able to provide commercial transit out of the country. And I would add that we're also exploring other options to expand the capacity of doing this, including exploring whether it's possible to help Americans leave by land and by sea.
John Kirby is Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, today briefing reporters at the White House. That was part of his opening statement. During the questions with the reporters, one asked about efforts to evacuate Americans from Gaza.
On Morning Edition today, we had someone on who is an American citizen living in Gaza. Is the United States doing anything to help American citizens who are trapped in Gaza who may want to get back to the U.S.?
These are
the hostages,
Palestinians.
but yes, like dual passport holders.
Yeah, the first and most important thing that we're trying to do is as I mentioned yesterday, allow for safe passage. But right now, they can't leave. So we would have no physical means of permitting that transit out. And so that's why we're so actively having conversations with the Israelis and the Egyptians about a safe passage corridor so that people who want to leave can leave. And then at that time, if it's onward travel that they might need, then, we'd be more in a position to be more physically involved. Does that make sense? Okay.
John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, today in the White House briefing room. More articles from the Associated Press. The United Nations Humanitarian Office has reported that the Israeli bombardment of Gaza has leveled 1,000 homes since the retaliation began last Saturday, and many in the territory face dire shortages of water, fuel, and medical supplies. Also, the U.S. and Qatar have reached an agreement that the Qataris will not act on any request from Tehran for the time being to access $6 billion in Iranian funds that were unblocked as part of a prisoner swap last month, a U.S. official said Thursday. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. It's free, and get the latest stories making news in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.